Welcome to BizTech's Asia's hottest startup show. Now, this show is part of our media partnership with the Singapore Business Show 2022. Our guest for today is Mohandass Kalaichelvan. He's the co-founder and CEO of Spenmo. Spenmo is an all-in-one payable software that consolidates smart cards, multi-currency dashboards, automated bill pay, and employee reimbursement all into one interface. Now, to tell us more, welcome to the show, Mohandass.
Thanks, Brian. Nice to be here.
Now, Mohandass, for a start, give us an overview of your company and walk us through the journey from your inception till today.
That's good. I don't think I could have made a better introduction to Spenmo than what you said. Like exactly what you said, we're an all-one payable software that wants to provide businesses the comfort, control, and visibility of how, when, and why money is leaving the company. And I think, today that's the vision. But I think obviously when we started, had inception, it was a much different journey. Maybe it kind of makes sense to kind of walk through a bit of my background on how we found this problem and why we started building. Before starting Spenmo, I was actually part of the team at Grab. I was part of the corporate strategy team and also worked a lot in Grab Financial Group. One of the problems we were solving for was actually the Grab merchant app, right? So I was talking to a lot of merchants who were using the Grab business app. And they had feedback, that Grab wallet could collect money, right, from the customers by QR codes, pay now, and all these things. But the Grab merchant app couldn't process the payments that they wanted to, right? As a Grab merchant, most of these were F&B and small medium businesses, right? Mm-hmm. They wanted to pay rent, they wanted to pay supplier vendor payments, and they just wanted to schedule all those things out of the Grab merchant app. And I think as a company, Grab just had B2C and B2B, and obviously now it's just pivoted so much into B2C that we never really had the time at Grab to invest into a good B2B solution. And I think after those customer interviews, I think gave me the confidence that, hey, I think there's a problem here to solve, which is kind of tracking money out of a company, right? And out of a small business. I think that's how we got started in 2019. So I think obviously when we started, we're just processing, like very simple expense management and, simple bill pay and corporate cards. And I think today, the vision first is to track every single dollar going out of your company. I think one of the things we kind of realize is that having a steady hand and a view on money flowing out the company is really essential to your survival as a small business and a medium business as well.
Mm-hmm. No, absolutely. So having done that, walk us through then how you hit the ground running after you basically got that light bulb moment.
Yeah, I think, was basically having a conversation with my soon-to-be co-founder that we were going to leave our pretty steady jobs and take the plunge. But I think, from the customer conversations and prospect conversations, we had enough confidence and, believed that this was a big problem to solve and that there was software that could be outside the Grab ecosystem as a standalone that could solve this problem, right? So I think as a challenge, like for any founder who's kind of listening to this, number one thing is to find your first 100 customers. Right, I think for us was like, where are the early guys? Who are the early adopters of the solution, right? I think now when I kind of look back on the journey, we are kind of like 3 years in, it's super clear, right? The early adopters are always the tech companies, right? Tech co-founders, tech startups. They just understand software and what we're building so much more easily. So those were our early customers, right? And obviously as a tech company, when you think about money going out, you have your subscriptions, you have your marketing. And the first problem we solved was actually very simple. Right, as an early stage company, it was very hard for you to get access to a corporate credit card. Right, you go to your, in Singapore, your DBS, your OCBCs, and all the other banks, mm-hmm. And because you don't have any track record of profitability and balance sheet that is strong, you just can't get access to a simple corporate card. Right, and that was actually affecting them. A lot of the founders and early teams you spoke to were just using their personal cards for company spending, and it just got really, really messy. So our job was very simple. We wanted to build like a smart virtual corporate card that could be easily issued. And you could sign up for it on the first day of your company and get access to it, right? And we were able to do that. So founders and startups were our first beachhead customers. They really liked the easiness and how easy it was to get a card from us. And I think the big thing that we launched in 2019, which was quite unique at that point in time, was not just a physical card that had to be shared with 10 employees. Is that if you have 10 employees, you can issue 10 virtual cards in real time, put controls on them, put limits on them, and really track where the money is being spent as an early stage company. That was the first problem we solved.
Now, what does your solution suite look like?
Yeah, so I mean, like I said, the first beachhead was corporate cards, right? And then eventually, as a good founder, as a good company, you should always be talking to customers and also be talking to prospects as well, right? So we eventually found that, compared to the US, card penetration here is just lower in terms of acceptance. So if you think about your AP, which is accounts payable, you can't process 100% of your AP, your money out, purely on cards, because there are vendors out there who just don't accept cards. You need to do a local bank transfer to them.
Yeah.
So some of the early customers are like, hey, Mohandass, like, hey, I love your cards, but I can't use your cards to pay this supplier because he doesn't use the payment gateway, he doesn't accept your cards. Can you still help me pay that, right? And that's when we kind of realized that, hey, we've been kind of thinking super narrowly just about like tech subscriptions and marketing spend and extend reimbursement. The real problem to solve was really visibility and control on your entire payable stack, right? So after cards, we launched automated bill pay, right? I think people ask me, what does automated bill pay mean? Right, is basically the ability to extract an invoice, like for example, the supplier, the amount, the date to pay, and schedule that payment, right? And what happens today is that there's no software that does that, right? You have manual and big bloated finance teams in Southeast Asia whose job is to literally look at a stack of invoices, route it to the right approvers with email threads and WhatsApp threads, wait for them to say yes, and then manually go into a bank portal and key that out. So to me, that was a big opportunity, right? Like, cards is great, it's a wedge into companies, but the real problem to solve was, bill pay automation, right? Which is, how do you extract the right data to help finance teams? How do you route approvals, right? And have them all done in a system where they could track easily? And how do you process and schedule all these things without having a big team having to key in into a bank portal, right? I think that's what automated bill pay for us was the next big solution.
So Mohandass, just listening to you, and understanding all these processes and being a small business owner myself for over 20 years, I completely understand the problems that you're trying to solve. But obviously, one of the things I also realize is because your tentacles are here, there's a lot more that you can actually do.
Yeah.
What are your plans in terms of rolling out new functions and features, obviously depending on the regulatory framework as well?
Yeah, I think that's great, right? I think what's kind of makes Spenmo unique, we found eventually over the last 3 years, is that we have this combination of like fintech and software. I think we've heavily invested in fintech infrastructure, right? So you have our cards, you have the ability to make payments locally and internationally. That's our fintech infrastructure. But all the focus right now for the team is really building like a world-class accounts payable software, right? I think people always think like, hey, AP just means sending money out, right? It's easy enough. But I think what people kind of forget and what we know now, I think at this point I've kind of maybe spoken to over 2,000 CFOs and finance teams in the region of the problems that they face. And what I realized is that there's so many steps that happens before money goes out, and there's a lot of steps that happens after money goes out as well. So you can imagine like Spenmo wants to basically be the operating system all the way from the time that somebody in the company wants to buy something to the point it is a transaction in the ledger, rightly categorized in your accounting system, right? That's a multi-step process. So now we're really investing a lot in the software to be the communication hub. When, for example, Brian in the company, wants to buy something, he initiates that request on Spenmo, he gets the payment methods there, the approvers are there, he gets bought with a Spenmo card, for example, it gets categorized into the right categories and team budgets, and then it goes to the accounting system. So the more we can automate that, the vision is to really be, to make finance teams superhuman. Right, what we find today is that 70-80% of the time is doing things that Spenmo would be able to do, right? And we just want to be compliments to them so that they can really focus on things that Spenmo can't do, which is how can you procure better as a company? Where can you spend less as a company? How can you spend more efficiently? How can you, conserve more cash, especially in this climate? Those are things that we want them to do so that they can be strategic business partners to the CEO and the business teams. And we don't see enough of that in Southeast Asia today.
And Mohandass, because of all the innovations and basically the blurring of lines, as you said, between software and fintech, do you have aspirations then to perhaps provide credit and lending facilities as part of your service offerings?
I think that's always been on our roadmap at some point. I think once we built that fintech, we've already built the fintech layout. Now the next part is like really investing heavily on our software layer and becoming that operating system for anything payables related. And I think that will give us a good beachhead into like potentially credit and lending at some point in the future, because we have all this data on our companies, who they're paying out, are they paying on time, what's their cash flow look like? We do connect to the accounting system as well. And I think it's an open question whether we do it or whether we partner with other lenders and lending partners as well, right, in the ecosystem. I've always believed that, for a company to be big and successful, we don't need to do everything on our own. I think sometimes in Southeast Asia, people are like super competitive, like, oh, I want to do this. I'm not going to partner with this guy because you could potentially come into my space. But I think that's not great. And I think it's not great for the ecosystem. So Spenmo's always believed in a partnership model where we really want to focus on building great accounts payable software. And potentially we could partner with lenders to do the credit lending piece. And I think together we could have a lot of synergies because the lenders, because of us, could have better underwriting, better risk scores. They really understand customers better. And we're happy to be part of that system to help as well.
Now, Mohandass, you've been on a upward trajectory that's on steroids. So you just raised an extremely right timing as well, just over $85 million early this year in a Series B round led by Tiger Global. You've raised a total of 121 million over 4 rounds. Tell us about how you're going to deploy this capital that you've just raised, obviously at perfect timing before this funding winter hit.
Yeah, so I'm going to kind of avoid more of the Series B talk. I think I want to talk a bit more about Series A, that was led by Insight. But I think, like you said, I think timing was perfectly right. I think we have believers on the software side, like Insight, who really believe in the software that we're building. And I think a lot of it is just down to the fact that there's very little Southeast Asia software that's built for Southeast Asia companies, right? And I think we really want to change the trend. I think like when we kind of look at accounts payable software, it's really going to be the regional winners that win, mainly because Spenmo has the intersection of fintech and software, right? For example, it's very hard for a US issuer, for example, to kind of suddenly come to Southeast Asia overnight because your corporate cards have to be issued locally. Right, so we see the system super clearly that we're going to use this money to become the regional winner in Southeast Asia and maybe broader APAC. But that's about the ambition first because you need to be focused to win. So our sense is that in the AP software space, there's going to be a few winners in the US, a few winners in Europe, and a few winners in Southeast Asia, right? And it's going to be very regional dominated because AP and accounting systems are very localized as well. So it's hard to go into a new country and say, hey, let's do 80 countries overnight because it's not just purely software. You have the licenses, the compliance done in each of these countries. You got to understand unique accounting systems as well, which is a lot of work. And just one of the reasons why I don't think there'll be like one global winner in this space.
And Spenmo today, what's your footprint like in the region?
Oh, so we're live in Singapore, Indonesia, and Philippines. Those are 3 core markets for us. Even after the raise, those 3 markets are big and it takes a lot of focus from us. So Singapore is where we started. This is where home is for us. About 1/3 of our team is in Singapore, and it's a great place to start a company. I think Singapore government is very friendly towards startups, and the beauty for it is that a lot of the regional companies also have their finance teams in Singapore, which allowed us to talk to those customers. Our earliest customers, some of them were regional, and they were the ones who kind of actually spurred us to like launch in Indonesia and Philippines to solve the same problem for the rest of their country teams. So I think we kind of just followed our customers. They were like, hey, I have an Indo team, I have a Philippines team. Can you help me on payables management for them? And then that's how we kind of launched Indonesia next, then Philippines about late last year. And it's been a great journey for us.
Now, I want to zoom in on you, Mohandass, for a couple of reasons. One, I'm going to talk to you about you being a prolific angel investor. Tell us about how you got started and the types of investments you've made so far.
Yeah, I think that's a great question. I think honestly, it started with us kind of getting into YC. So we got into Y Combinator in the summer 2020 batch. And I think that's when I got introduced to like the Silicon Valley ecosystem. And, when we did our seed round early in September 2020 at YC Demo Day, there was a few angel investors that invested in us at the round. And, I kind of saw the value that they added. They were not from a big fund. They moved quickly. They gave money quickly. And I think the beauty of some of this most of the angel investors that we took money from was that they were ex-founders and ex-entrepreneurs. And I think it's just a different kind of advice that they can give you one-to-one in terms of how to run your business. Not everyone can kind of tell you exactly do this, and you become a unicorn. But I think a lot of the ex-founders who were angel investors in Spenmo were able to help me on that journey of, right, hey, this is how you kind of scale a team. This is how you think about hiring a new exec member. This is how you should run sales and marketing. And more often than not, they had a lot of failures and challenges along the way, which was useful to learn from so that we don't make the same mistake as well. And I think that's how I kind of started thinking that, okay, now it's been like 3 years for me. I get to see a lot of startups in YC and Southeast Asia, and think, thankfully, Spenmo is a good name. So most of these guys will reach out to me on LinkedIn, founders who are thinking of starting a company or have already started the company. And I think for me, the philosophy is quite simple. If I think I can be helpful to them in anything, whether it's the industry, the segment, or the stage they're at, and I like the business model, then I'll do like a small ticket investment in them. And the whole point is trying to build this founder ecosystem where we kind of support each other. And I've learned a lot from, at this point, I think probably close to 85, 90 investments. And, I really look forward to investor updates from them. And it's just looking at how, they are thinking about the business. So I know Spenmo is very focused on fintech and software. But as an angel investor, I don't just do fintech and software for one reason, which is that I think sometimes being a startup founder, you get super focused on your problem statement, and you think that that's the only thing that matters in the world. And it's very easy to kind of drag into that black hole. So investing in other things like, like health tech and, clean tech, renewable energies, I've done a few investments in like EV vehicles as well. It just broadens the mind to see all the other problem statements out there, and also see some of the strategies that other founders are deploying when they're solving problems. So I think, obviously I try to help them, but honestly, they help me as well in terms of just like keeping a broad mind, seeing new issues pop up as well.
How do you manage your 85 to 90 investments? That's a challenge in itself.
I think for me, the rule is quite simple. I kind of look up to startup investors like, the HubSpot co-founder and like Naval. And I think my only rule is that I don't take more than 30 minutes, in between like talking to the team, scheduling time, and wiring the money. Because honestly, Spenmo is like takes a brunt of my time, and I want to focus on that. So usually like, I would not spend too much time on a DD, and I anchor a lot more on like problem statement and how big this opportunity is. And a large part of the early stage, which I think applies, something I kind of learned by myself, is really applies on the founder himself or herself, right? Like you want to anchor on people who are tenacious, resilient, and have kind of shown that capability in previous things before becoming a founder. So I just chat with them. I kind of figure out quite quickly whether it's someone with hunger, with resilience and tenacity. And if it's a yes, and it's a big problem statement, like I'm usually in.
Now, Mohandass, then what is your typical ticket size? Because what was interesting is you just said 30 minutes later, I wire the money. So what sort of ticket size do you typically?
Yeah, so like, we also invest as a syndicate, right? So there's other founders that we kind of partner together. So average ticket size we kind of do together is like 10 to 50K, depending on the size of the round. So we tend to be quick. We aim to be quick, right? We don't hold up a process. At the end of the day, it's about being helpful. And some of the companies that we've invested in have actually grown bigger than Spenmo itself. So I'm super happy. And it's also just nice to see other people in the ecosystem who are kind of similarly taking on challenges, right? So we could Spenmo's partner with some of the portfolio as well in terms of going to market together. So just a nice way to kind of be plugged into the scene.
So now looking back over your 3-year journey, what do you think you've done right?
I think number one, I think we've done right. I'm very grateful for this. I think we've hired great people. Like I think this Spenmo journey would not have been possible without the early founding team, and subsequently, I think at every single stage, right? At Series A and subsequent rounds, there's different kind of talent that comes in, and I think we've done the hiring well, right? I think end of the day is about right now Spenmo is close to like 300 people, so it's kind of distilling the vision and the strategy to like multiple people across the region, a lot of like local nuances as well, right? So I think we've hired people well, we've distilled the vision well, and I think now we're like firmly in execution mode.
And what do you think you've done that perhaps you could have done better?
Yeah, I think, I think people ask me this a lot, and I think this, sometimes I forget, and sometimes other people forget, this is my first startup, right? So I'm learning a lot on the job. And I think one of the things that I should have done better was, I think when we started the company in July 2019. And by the time we launched our first MVP or product was actually in like January 2020. So 6 months, 6 solid months, but we didn't launch an MVP. And now when I look back on it, I'm like, guys, we should have launched much quicker, right? There's those 6 months of feedback, we could iterate it much faster. Some of the things that we built within those 6 months, people didn't actually want it. We thought somehow on a whiteboard that this particular feature or product would be great. And then when we actually launched it, the take-up rate for those particular product features was so low. So that's probably the biggest lesson for me if when I do my next startup or whenever, right? Is that just fail faster, right? Like you almost need to be embarrassed a little bit by the first MVP we launched. And I was so focused on trying to make it as perfect as possible, which is stupid, right? Because it's a 6-month product, right? Which is complex. Like, it's never going to be perfect. So I think if I could go back in time, I would just lower the bar on perfectness and go for something that's a lot more MVP-ish, and then not in my head or whiteboard think that, oh, this is the thing that customers want, let's go build it, right? Unless you're Steve Jobs, who knows exactly what consumers want without talking to consumers. But most likely 99% of people are not Steve Jobs. So you should go talk to customers, iterate quickly, fail quickly, and not spend 6 months launching MVP. That's what I would redo.
Now, Mohandass, it's been a fascinating conversation. Do you have any final words of wisdom, perhaps, that you'd want to leave us with before we end the conversation?
Yeah, I think end of the day, like, like doing a startup, if you think about running your own company, I think you got to be passionate about the problem statement. And I think you got to be tenacious and resilient, right? I think those are things that are very, very important, because I think from the outside, I think when you look at the PR and the marketing, the Spenmo journey looks like this. But in reality is like lots of ups and downs, right? So you got to be able to cope with like the downs and like, some of the things that don't go in your favor. And I think you have to be like a tenacious like problem solver, right? Because I think that's what ultimately makes a founder good or not, or like good and great, right? The ability to be tenacious, resilient, to constantly problem solve and get the company to the next stage, even when things are not in your favor, right? When markets are not in your favor, when customers are not buying the right thing, to be able to kind of step back and take it on yourself and say like, hey, it's not about me not being good enough. It's about what the product should be like, what we can redo, how can we kind of problem solve to get to the next stage, right? Because if you're someone who's kind of like gets put off by one failure, then this journey will be very, very painful, right? So I think that's sort of my advice. But end of the day, like, it's a lot of fun. So anybody's thinking about starting a business and you have an idea, whatever the macro environment is, I think you should go and do it. Take a stab at it.
Now, Mohandass, thank you very much for taking your time to be on the show. It's been a pleasure having you.
Thanks, Brian.
I'm Brian Fernandez, and we've been speaking to Mohandass Kalaichelvan, the co-founder and CEO of Spenmo, on BizTech's Asia's hottest startup show. This show is part of our media partnership with the Singapore Business Show 2022. This video and podcast will be on our social media platforms, as well as our website, www.biztech.asia. It will also be on our syndication partners, TV stations, radio stations, and third-party websites. Thanks again for tuning in.